The movie begins with a woman named Melody who is driving her snow jet at full speed in the middle of the forest. However, Melody could not control her snow jet, so she fell and resulted in her thigh being injured by a tree trunk. Melody, who saw a wooden house, tried to approach the house to ask for help. Coincidentally, an old man named Henry who lived alone in the house came and immediately helped Melody while watching the surrounding area carefully. After that, Henry brought Melody into the house. Once inside the house, Henry let Melody rest for a while. A few hours later, Henry was seen packing sharp tools such as knives and scissors. Apparently, Henry intends to pull out the wooden branch that is still stuck on Melody's thigh.
There are 5 more that needs to be removed.
The scene then moves to a few months earlier. At that time, Henry was in a hotel. We are finally told that Henry turned out to be a hitman who had killed 99 targets. Currently, Henry is targeting a man named Kessler, who will become his 100th target. Henry seemed to be watching Kessler, because if there was a chance, Henry would immediately finish him. When Kessler went to the sauna room, Henry finished Kessler without being detected by anyone because the room was covered in smoke. After finishing his work, Henry casually left and then entered a room. Apparently, Henry came there to collect payment for his work. The next day, we see a motorcade heading to the local cemetery. Apparently, it was the day Kessler was to be buried. There were already 2 detectives assigned to handle the case of Kessler's death. The detective was named Kappa, who looked young, while his old colleague was named Davies. Then, the 2 of them talked about Kessler's death, which was thought to have been killed by a very professional person because at the scene of Kessler's death, there was absolutely no trace left by the perpetrator except for Kessler's own watch. Meanwhile, the bullet used by the perpetrator is a polymer bullet, which will self-destruct after being fired. In the afternoon, Detectives Kappa and Davies called Kessler's confidant, Brigler. Detective Kappa asked if Kessler had any enemies or business rivals who might want Kessler dead. Brigler replied that Kessler was a businessman who owned many large companies, and many of Kessler's rivals wanted his death. Brigler also explained that Kessler had an heir named Charlie, Kessler's only son. If Charlie also dies, all of Kessler's companies will be auctioned separately, which is what Kessler's business competitors want. Hearing this, Detective Kappa asked where Charlie was now. Brigler said that Charlie had been hidden somewhere because Brigler feared that Charlie would be the next target. After hearing all the explanations, Detective Kappa finally allowed Brigler to leave.
May I leave now?
Yeah, sure.
The scene moves to Melody, who lives in an apartment. She is seen packing up her luggage to leave secretly. It turns out that Melody has always been monitored by a bodyguard named Malcolm. I don't know who Melody really is, but what is certain is that Malcolm is always guarding Melody's movements. At dawn, Malcolm, who felt something was wrong, immediately entered Melody's room. However, Malcolm was surprised because Melody had escaped from her apartment. A few hours later, we are shown Melody, who is already at the taxi rank, and tells the taxi driver to take her somewhere. In short order, Melody arrives at her desired snow jet rental location. Here, Melody said that she wanted to go to the Pacific and would rent a snow jet. Hearing this, the rental owner refused, as it would take a long time for Melody to get to the Pacific. However, after Melody gave a sum exceeding the price of the snow jet, the rental owner finally allowed it. After a long journey, Melody stopped to refuel. At the same time, Melody was approached by a young man who offered Melody an inn because Melody would not find another inn on the next trip. Hearing this, Melody remained silent, and after refueling, she immediately continued her journey.
There's nothing for 60 miles.
I know.
The next day revealed a house in the middle of the Pacific Forest, which was Henry's house. At that time, Henry was assembling weapons because we know Henry is a hitman. Not long after, Henry was startled by Melody screaming, the scene at the movie's beginning. Then Henry took care of Melody and had time to remove the tree branch that was stuck in Melody's thigh. Although Melody was in great pain, Henry told her to endure the pain. On the other hand, Detectives Kappa and Davies are examining data regarding the buyer of the polymer bullet that was apparently used to kill Kessler. Detective Kappa said that the perpetrator who had killed Kessler was probably ex-military or a trained assassin. After that, Detective Kappa told his subordinates to trace Brigler's phone number because he also had to check on the people closest to Kessler, including Brigler, who was Kessler's confidant at the same time. Davies informed them that he would be reassigned as requested by their superiors, so Davies could no longer participate in solving the Kessler death case. Hearing this, Detective Kappa looks sad, but he still supports and wishes the best for his colleague. Back to Melody, who is surprised to see Henry bringing a deer into the house. Henry says he was forced to bring the animal in because so many wolves were outside, ready to pounce on the deer. Knowing this, Melody did not expect Henry to be such a good person. Melody also thanked Henry for taking care of her and treating her. Meanwhile, Henry, curious, asked why Melody was in this area. Melody replied that she was having an adventure because she had been languishing in her apartment for a long time. Knowing that Henry asks Melody to practice walking immediately because he wants to live quietly alone without anyone bothering him, including Melody. The next morning, Henry went to the scene where Melody fell yesterday. While examining the scene, Henry was a little surprised because no obstacles could have caused Melody to fall. But soon, Henry is surprised by the appearance of a wolf from the residual smell of Melody's blood. Immediately, Henry pulled out his gun, which scared the wolf away. While in the house, Melody, who felt thirsty, tried to get a drink on the table, but Melody fell down due to her wound still had not healed. A few moments later, Henry returned and saw Melody, who was in pain. It turned out that there was still a branch in Melody's stomach, and Henry took the initiative to remove the branch. Then, Henry told Melody to drink and bite cotton so that Melody could endure the pain. On the other hand, Detective Kappa checked the files of all Brigler's phone calls. After checking for a long time, Detective Kappa finally found that Brigler had contacted Malcolm for only 5 seconds. This made Detective Kappa a little suspicious and curious about who Malcolm was. Meanwhile, Malcolm was seen arriving at the Snow Jet rental place to look for Melody. Then, Malcolm showed Melody's photo to the rental owner while asking if he had ever seen this woman. At first, the rental owner was silent, but after being given money, the owner finally told him that the woman went towards the Pacific. The rental owner had put GPS in all the snow jets he rented out. Still, unfortunately, the GPS in Melody's snow jet seemed to have been disabled. Immediately, Malcolm also hires a snow jet to look for Melody.
Did she leave an address? A destination?
Yeah, Pacific Ocean.
The scene switches to Melody, whose wound is now recovering. Melody asks why Henry is living alone in the forest. Henry replies that he's tired of the hustle and bustle of the city, so he chooses to live in a quiet place to enjoy a quiet life. Then Melody began talking about herself to get closer to Henry. On the other hand, Detective Kappa is seen visiting his ex-wife Kessler at a hospital. Detective Kappa came there to find information about Kessler and the people closest to Kessler. However, unfortunately, the ex-wife, who had long separated from Kessler, could not provide more detailed information about Kessler because the ex-wife also had dementia. Before leaving, Detective Kappa gave Kessler's ex-wife a watch that belonged to Kessler because, who knows, the watch would be passed on to their son Charlie. However, Kessler's ex-wife explained that Charlie was a woman. Detective Kappa looks quite surprised because he thought that Charlie was a boy.
I may have lost my memory, but I still know I bore a child. It most certainly was not a boy.
At night, Malcolm, caught by the storm, finally decided to stay at the last and heading towards the Pacific. Once inside, Malcolm immediately ordered a drink because it was so cold. In the meantime, Henry is seen treating Melody's hand because it was also dislocated from yesterday's fall. Here, Melody asks why Henry looks professional when treating people. Henry replies that he must be able to do everything because he lives alone in the forest. The next day, Melody, who saw Henry fishing outside the house, suddenly assembled a gun because it turned out that Melody came here for nothing but revenge. It is known that Melody has also learned martial arts and shooting for only one purpose, which is to finish Henry. After that, Melody walked out to Henry, who was fishing. Without hesitation, Melody immediately shot Henry right in the head.
Silence.
Now I know why you're here.
However, unfortunately, it was all a trap because Henry already knew about it. After that, Henry immediately tortures Melody to find out who Melody really is and why Melody wants to finish him off.
If your legs are squashed for too long, your veins will become irreparable. After 10, you won't walk again. If you stay like that for another minute, you'll limp for the rest of your life. Who are you?
At first, Melody chooses to remain silent. But because she is no longer strong, Melody finally says that she is Kessler's biological daughter who wants to avenge. Henry was a little surprised because, as far as he knew, Kessler's biological son was Charlie, when in fact Charlie was Melody. It was revealed that the mastermind of all this was Brigler, who was Kessler's confidant. And Brigler is also the one who told Melody to come to that place. Henry, who was sorry, was finally willing to let Melody go. A few hours later, during a storm, Melody secretly went out to turn on the GPS transmitter installed under the snow jet. However, it turns out that the GPS transmitter has been tampered with by Henry, so Melody is forced back into the house. Here, Henry tells her that he has actually been contracted to finish off Kessler's son, who is none other than Melody. However, Henry accepted the contract because he thought Kessler's child was a boy. Moreover, according to his client, Kessler and his son are master swindlers, so Henry is willing to accept the contract. Hearing this, Melody asked who exactly was the person who had contracted Henry. Henry replied that, of course, the person who told him was Brigler. In fact, he also still keeps Brigler's phone number. Then, Melody told him that her father really wanted a boy, so her father named Melody Charlie. Meanwhile, Detective Kappa tried to contact Brigler, but his phone was never picked up. In the end, Detective Kappa begins to suspect that the mastermind is Brigler targeting Kessler's assets. The next morning shows Malcolm, who is still at the inn because he is caught in a snowstorm. Then, simultaneously, an unknown phone number sends a message, namely a map, to Malcolm. When the message was clicked, it turned out to be Detective Kappa trying to hack Malcolm's cell phone. In the end, Detective Kappa found out Malcolm's location, and he immediately contacted Davies. Coincidentally, Davies is now on duty in the area, so Detective Kappa asks for help finding Malcolm. Meanwhile, Malcolm himself is seen just resuming his journey. The evening shows Henry's house looking messy because a few hours ago, there had been a snowstorm. At the same time, they were surprised by the sound of gunfire, which came from Malcolm. It is known that Malcolm came there not to save Melody, but to finish Melody, along with Henry, on orders from Brigler. Shortly after that, Malcolm was terrified because now he was being hunted by Henry. On one occasion, finally, Malcolm was successfully eliminated by Henry using a knife. The next morning, Detectives Kappa and Davies arrive, and they find Malcolm's snow jet on the side of the road. Meanwhile, Melody, who saw Henry, was carrying a knife. She also looked scared because Melody thought Henry would finish her, even though, at that time, Henry had just killed Malcolm. Then, when the opportunity arises, Melody hits Henry and rushes away. Henry was annoyed. He immediately gave a warning shot, which Detectives Kappa and Davies heard. In short, Henry managed to catch up with Melody, and he immediately pointed a gun. But apparently, Henry pointed the gun not to kill Melody, but to drive away a wolf. Unfortunately, at the same time, Detectives Kappa and Davies managed to find Henry. They immediately killed Henry because they thought that Henry would shoot Melody.
Did you find what you were looking for? Close your eyes. They never forget the taste of blood, like me.
Then, the police arrive, and Melody enters the house to get something. Here, Melody looks sad while remembering all the good things Henry did to her. Then, Melody comes out and asks the police to arrest Brigler with the evidence of the phone number given by Henry. Ultimately, Melody remains the sole heir to her father Kessler's wealth.